Welcome back. David Heurtel in for Aaron and Natasha. For decades now, Canada has failed to provide safe drinking water to many of its Indigenous communities. And joining us now are Nelson Barbosa and Curtis Bergeron, who work at Indigenous Service Canada's Community Infrastructures branch, which is working to achieve clean drinking water in First Nations communities. And before I turn to them, I read a story about them in the Sunday New York Times on Christmas Day. So this is not just a problem that we in Canada have to face, but it's affecting Canada's reputation around the world, and we're still not getting around to it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for having us.
So, I'll start with you, Nelson. So tell me where the situation is, because even last year, Prime Minister Trudeau made some big announcements about this situation, but at the same time, it doesn't seem that things are moving nearly as fast as they should.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks again for having us, David. And just like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded Algonquin territory here in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. I think the question is fair. Absolutely. There are currently 32 long-term drinking water advisories in place in 28 First Nations communities. And as you mentioned, this government has made a commitment to see those long-term drinking water advisories come to an end. Mm-hmm. And long-term drinking water advisories, just for the benefit of the audience, is a drinking water advisory that has been in place for a year and longer. And one drinking water advisory is too many. Mm-hmm. But we are seeing progress, and there have been results, and I think the New York Times article spoke to that as well. And since 2015, First Nations have lifted over 137 long-term drinking water advisories and another 236 short-term drinking water advisories, which are advisories that are under a year. So there is progress being made, mm-hmm. but you're right in that that progress has not come to an end, and we need to continue to work in partnership with First Nations to ensure that we meet the goal of getting to zero.
Well, you'll understand, and I'm not going to teach you anything here today, but for someone like me, it's total indignation for a country like Canada not to be able to provide safe drinking water, and even for a day. I can't even imagine. We were talking about the 25th anniversary of the ice storm here in Montreal, when people didn't have basic services for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and it was the end of the world. And here we have some Indigenous communities that can't rely on safe drinking water for years on end. So it's something major. And could you tell us more about maybe the causes? Why can't there be safe drinking water for all these Indigenous communities?
Yeah, so there are 634 mm-hmm. community First Nations across Canada, yeah. coast to coast to coast, and each of those communities, as you would imagine, whether they're in Quebec or Greater Montreal or in Ontario or any parts of this country, have unique needs, and those needs extend to water. So really, in my mind, kind of to bring it down to kind of brass tacks, there are two kind of major factors that would lead to having unsafe water in a particular community. The first kind of fact is around the infrastructure, basically the provision of safe water. And so that means water treatment plants, the pipes that go from a water treatment plant or a water treatment facility to a house, and infrastructure over time becomes dilapidated and needs to be replaced. And sometimes a water treatment facility has an emergency, like a part will break, for example. And so, the first element of why there would be unsafe water is really around the repair, the renovation, and the replacement of existing water systems. And so that's, a huge piece. And some of these systems, I don't want to kind of gloss over how large some of these systems are. They take several years to kind of develop, build, mm-hmm. and make sure that they're operational. So certainly infrastructure and a commitment to infrastructure development is a huge piece of why we want to see increased results. The second is really about the people that make systems work. It's the operators in particular facilities. And so ensuring that there are the right level of investments in human capacity and in training to ensure that water operators are the best equipped to operate facilities from coast to coast to coast are core factors of some of the reasons why we're seeing the remaining 32 drinking water advisories.
And so can you tell us more, and this is for both of you, what are the impacts for these 32 Indigenous communities of not having access to drinking water?
Yeah, certainly the impacts are varied. In some cases, in some cases, we're talking about systems that impact the entire community. In other cases, we're talking about systems that are very much more localized, like they impact a health facility or a very small subdivision of a particular community. So, there isn't one particular kind of effect, but, really it's about ensuring that, ISK supports quality monitoring program of water programs in First Nations communities. And those monitoring programs pick up things like the presence of bacteria or chemicals in a particular water system. They provide these monitoring programs provide guidance on things like water safety, and based on the requests from First Nation leaders, reviewing infrastructure proposals, like I talked about earlier, the importance of having quality infrastructure, looking at that infrastructure from a public health lens. So there isn't just one causal impact of not having a drinking water advisory in place. It's really about what is the quality monitoring program to ensure that when a system fails, that there's a system in place in order to kind of ensure that water is safe, and then also what is the monitoring around things like bacteria and chemical levels to ensure that that is not ingested by humans or gets into the water system.
And tell me more about your organization. How is it formed? This is not a government entity, right?
The water monitoring program?
No, the INSC, Indigenous Services Canada.
Yeah, so Indigenous Services Canada is one of the departments of the government of Canada.
Okay, you're part of the government.
Yeah, so we have a federal minister, and we work. Our job is to work directly with First Nations communities. So First Nation communities are ultimately they own, control, and manage their water systems. Indigenous Services Canada provides funding for sure and technical supports on things like water monitoring, environmental public health, and also infrastructure supports. So the relationship between, as I'm sure you've had on this program before,
sure.
the relationship between the Government of Canada and First Nations is in a period of reconciliation. And so the role of Indigenous Services Canada is to provide significant investment in this space. And from 2016 until next year, there will be just over $5.6 billion spent on water systems in First Nations communities, and that means water systems that have long-term drinking water advisories, but also other water systems, recognizing how many First Nations communities there are. And also, our department works in partnership with communities to ensure that they have the right level of capacity supports relative to the water system delivery that they need in a given community. So our role is really to support communities in the administration of their public health affairs, and also to ensure that the adequacy of water is in place and addressed.
So for these remaining 32 Indigenous communities, what's the timeline here?
So it's 32 long-term drinking water advisories in 28 communities. So again, First Nations communities are ultimately they issue long-term drinking water. They issue drinking water advisories, and they're also rescind them or repeal them. So timing is sometimes an issue, and that we have to work in partnership with communities on. We anticipate, given construction in this country is becoming more and more difficult to procure services, we anticipate that about 25% of them will be lifted by early spring, and then the remaining is work that we need to do in order to ensure that the construction timelines are met, the capacity is there, and that our partnership continues beyond this period and into the next year.
So, thank you for the correction. So, for those 28 communities across the country, I mean, it means still what? Bottled water, filter, boiling advisories? Is that the day-to-day?
The day-to-day varies considerably. So in those, each community that has a long-term drinking water advisory has a plan in place to rescind it. And so in some cases, as I mentioned earlier, we could have a new system, and same system that you might find in Montreal, where there is a failure of a particular piece of equipment, and so we need to ensure that that equipment is replaced, and there are procurement processes to do that. In other cases, we're talking about large-scale, significant investment in large and big pieces of infrastructure, and those can take several years. And so in some cases, there are interim supplies, like there are reverse osmosis systems that are provided to First Nations communities to provide immediate water. There are interim solutions where a small repair can happen to an existing piece of infrastructure while a larger piece of infrastructure is built to replace it. And then in other cases, at the request of First Nations, there is bottled water provided in order to ensure that that water is provided in lieu of having that from the tap. So it isn't just one universal solution. There are many that are happening, and that's really why partnership is so important when we're talking about these projects.
Well, I can only hope that you achieve your goals as fast as possible. Thank you very much for coming on today and shedding some light on this very, very important subject, and all the best for 2023.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for having us.
Take care. Nelson Barbosa is the Director General at Indigenous Services Canada's Community Infrastructure Branch. I don't know if we heard from him, but Curtis Bergeron was supposed to be on the line also. But did we hear from Curtis as well? Yeah, because I didn't make out who was who. But anyways, they were both on. And Curtis Bergeron is the Director of Strategic Water Management, Team Directorate, as well at Indigenous Service Canada.